Ferrari may already have a championship-level chassis in 2026. The problem is that their engine might be holding the whole project back. New reports suggest Ferrari could be around 30 horsepower down on Mercedes right now, and if that number is even close to accurate, it explains a lot. Because if Ferrari are missing that much power and still managing to stay competitive, then the car underneath it must be extremely strong, and that completely changes the way you look at the title fight. At first glance, a 30 horsepower gap sounds like pure disaster, and in the short term, it probably is. Straight line performance matters too much under these regulations for Ferrari to casually give that away and still expect to beat Mercedes every weekend. But there is another side to it. If Ferrari really are that far behind, then they are in line for meaningful development help during the season. And that could turn a weakness now into a huge advantage later. That is the key tension running through this whole story. Ferrari may be weak enough on engine power to suffer now, but weak enough to unlock the kind of extra development freedom that can pull them right back into the fight once the season settles down. The source says Ferrari are expected to receive additional development opportunity, and there is even talk that the team could receive the larger allocation rather than the smaller one. If that happens, Ferrari would have much more room to attack this engine problem properly, instead of just trimming around the edges. And that matters because the team is not simply looking for a quick patch. The report says Ferrari are working on a new internal combustion concept aimed at improving performance and reducing degradation in hotter conditions. That sounds like a proper recovery attempt, not a temporary cover-up. And if Ferrari really do fix that engine, the rest of the grid has a problem, because the source also leans heavily into the idea that Ferrari may already have one of the best chassis packages in Formula One. That would explain why they have remained relevant, even while carrying such a major power disadvantage. A car does not stay in the conversation by accident when it is losing that much on the straights. If the numbers are real, then Ferrari are making up an enormous amount with the platform itself. That is also why the Red Bull comparison is so interesting. According to the same report, Red Bull's power unit is actually very close to Mercedes, which is an impressive result in isolation. But that good news is being wiped out by the state of the chassis. The video goes as far as describing the RB22 as potentially the worst Red Bull car in the team's history in terms of correlation and production. So, while Ferrari may have the right car and the wrong engine, Red Bull may have built something much stranger. A very strong engine attached to a car that is simply not good enough. That contrast is the heart of the current power unit story. Ferrari looked like a team with a fixable weakness attached to a potentially elite car. Red Bull looked like a team with real power unit strength, but a much more chaotic overall package. And Mercedes looked like the team that got the most important part of the formula right from the start. There is another layer to Ferrari's problem, though, and it is timing. Even if Ferrari get the help they want, even if they already know what direction they want to go in, and even if the new concept works exactly as planned, the source makes it clear that none of this happens overnight. Approval has to come first. Then the upgrade path has to be finalized. Then the engine has to be properly built and introduced. So while Ferrari may be on the road back, they are still expected to spend a decent chunk of this season carrying the current deficit. That is why the estimated timeline matters so much. The source says a new Ferrari power unit before July is not realistic. That means Ferrari are still looking at a stretch of races where they may have to rely on chassis strength, clean execution, and damage limitation rather than outright power. In other words, this is not a rescue happening next weekend. It is a rescue Ferrari are trying to build toward mid-season. And then comes the biggest risk of all. Because while Ferrari are waiting for that engine step, Formula One is still debating possible changes to the current regulations. One of the major ideas being discussed is reducing the battery contribution. On paper, that sounds like a fix for some of the ugly racing characteristics teams and fans have been complaining about. But in practice, it could make Ferrari's life even harder in the short term. If the battery contribution is reduced, then the internal combustion engine becomes even more important as a percentage of total performance. And that would naturally make Mercedes' current engine edge even more valuable. So Ferrari are stuck in a strange position. They may be one of the teams that benefits most later once upgrades arrive, but one of the teams that could be punished hardest if the rules shift before that recovery is ready. That is what makes this Ferrari story so dangerous for the rest of the championship. If nothing changes, Ferrari suffer now, but may recover strongly later. If the rules change too soon, Ferrari's engine weakness gets exposed even harder before the fix arrives. And if Ferrari eventually land the upgrade while keeping this chassis performance, then Mercedes could suddenly have a proper title threat on their hands. So the short version is this. Ferrari are down on power. Red Bull may have built a car disaster around a surprisingly strong engine. Mercedes still hold the most important advantage. And the whole balance of the season may now depend on whether Ferrari can survive the short-term pain long enough for their engine recovery to arrive. If they do, this stops being a story about Ferrari falling behind. It becomes a story about Ferrari timing their comeback.